Chapter 1: The Return of the Ghost. The Wang manor did not breathe, it merely held its breath. It was a mausoleum of marble and gilded edges, a monument to a legacy built on the silent suffering of others. I, Aura Venunk, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand foyer, watching the rain lash against the glass. The sky over the estate was the color of a fresh bruised purplish black and heavy with the promise of a storm. Tonight was the night the ghost returned. 20 years ago, my biological brother Silas had vanished. The official story was a kidnapping, a tragedy that had left my parents devastated. In his absence, they had adopted Makoto, a boy with a charming smile and the perfect pedigree to inherit the Vishuji Empire. Makoto was the golden child, the polished diamond. I was the quiet observer, the girl who lived in the shadows of a brother who wasn't truly mine. Then, a week ago, a letter arrived. No return address, just a na profile and a date. "Has here," Makoto whispered, stepping up behind me. I could smell his expensive cologne sandalwood and arrogance. He straightened his silk tie, his knuckles white. "Aura, don't look so frightened. Has just a man who's been living in the gutter for 2 decades. He won't last a week in this house." I didn't answer. My heart felt like a trapped bird fluttering against my ribs. The heavy oak doors creaked open. The cold wind rushed in, extinguishing the scented candles in the hallway. A figure stood framed by the lightning. He was tall, unsettlingly thin, wearing a coat that looked like it had seen the underside of the world. His hair was damp, clinging to a face that was a sharper, crueler version of my father's. "Silas," my mother gasped from the top of the stairs, clutching her pearls so hard the string looked ready to snap. Silas didn't speak. He stepped into the light, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the Persian rug, his eyes dark bottomless pits swept over us. And then, it happened. It was a sound that wasn't a sound, it was a vibration at the base of my skull, a cold needle piercing my consciousness. It wasn't a voice, but a thought, raw and unfiltered, bleeding into my mind. I wonder which knife would cut through father's corroded artery fastest. The silver steak knife, or the jagged one for the bread. I gasped, clutching my head. My mother stumbled, her face draining of all color. My father, the indomitable patriarch, swayed on his feet. We all looked at Silas. He stood perfectly still, his expression a mask of serene, polite indifference. "Welcome home, son," my father managed to choke out, his voice trembling. Silas bowed slightly. His lips curled into a gentle, haunting smile. "It's good to be back, father," he said aloud. His physical voice was smooth, like velvet draped over gravel. But his mind was a symphony of gore. The red wine would hide the blood nicely. I should wait until the main course. Let them feel full before they die. Dinner was an exercise in psychological torture. We sat at the long mahogany table, the silver clinking against fine bone china. Makoto tried to dominate the conversation, bragging about a recent acquisition in Singapore, but no one was listening to his words. We were all trapped in the static-filled murder scene playing out in Silas' head. Makoto's throat looked soft, like a pheasant's. One quick twist, just one. Makoto's hand shook so violently he dropped his fork. It clattered against the plate, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Is something wrong, brother?" Silas asked, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. He reached out, his long fingers hovering near the salt shaker. "Salt for the wound. Always salt. I'm just tired," Makoto stammered, his forehead slick with sweat. I looked at Silas for a split second. His gaze locked onto mine. The noise in my head suddenly shifted. The violence vanished, replaced by a crystalline, terrifying clarity directed solely at me. "Little Willow, the only one who stayed in the garden. Do you remember the smell of the smoke, Aura, or did they make you forget that too?" I froze. I was 6 when he disappeared. I remembered smoke. I remembered a fire in the old nursery, but the doctors told me it was a dream. Silas took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving mine. He knew we could hear him, and he was using his mind as a leash, leading us exactly where he wanted us to go. Chapter 2: The Mind-Raiding Paradox. The days following Silas' return were shrouded in a thick, suffocating paranoia. It was as if a psychic fog had settled over the manor. We were all hyper-aware of our own thoughts, terrified that if we could hear him, perhaps he could hear us. But Silas remained a silent enigma, moving through the halls like a shadow. Makoto was unraveling. The golden child could not handle a rival who didn't even have to speak to dominate a room. "As a freak, Aura," Makoto hissed, cornering me in the library. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "The servants are whispering. They say the air turns cold when he passes. We have to get rid of him before he poisons father's mind." I pulled away from his grip. "He hasn't done anything, Makoto. He doesn't have to. You hear those things he thinks has a psychopath." That afternoon, Makoto decided to strike. He had lived his life as a master of manipulation, and he fell back on what he knew best: framing. Father had a collection of antique pocket watches, one of which was a Patek Philippe from the 1920s, worth a small fortune. During tea, the house was thrown into a panic. The watch was missing from the display case in the study. I saw Silas coming out of the study earlier, Makoto said, his voice feigning disappointment. I'm sure he just didn't know the rules of the house yet. Father turned his stern gaze toward Silas, who was sitting in a velvet armchair, reading a book on anatomy. Suddenly, the voice boomed in our heads, clearer than ever. Makoto put the watch in the third drawer of my dresser at 2:14 p.m. He tucked it inside a black sock. He thought I was in the garden, but I was watching him through the reflection in the hallway mirror. His hands were shaking, as a poor actor. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Silas, what is the meaning of this? Father demanded, though he looked more afraid than angry. Silas closed his book slowly. The meaning of what, father? The thoughts. Silas tilted his head, a look of innocent confusion on his face. I don't know what you mean. If you suspect me, please search my room. I have nothing to hide. We all marched to Silas' room. Makoto was pale, his bravado replaced by a look of sheer terror. Father went straight to the dresser, third drawer. Black sock. The gold watch glinted in the light as father pulled it out. Makoto, father said, his voice low and vibrating with rage. It's a lie. He did something to my mind as a sorcerer, a demon, Makoto screamed, backing away. The mask is cracking. Look at the beautiful pieces falling to the floor. Silas' thought was a cold laugh that echoed in the marrow of my bones. I watched Silas. He wasn't even looking at the watch. He was looking at the 6AV camera in the corner of the hallway, a camera that had been broken for months. Check the footage, father, Silas said softly. I fixed the server this morning. I thought it was a shame such an expensive security system was going to waste. The footage showed everything. Makoto sneaking in, the frantic look on his face, the clumsy planting of the evidence. That night, for the first time in 20 years, Makoto was barred from the dinner table. Silas sat in the hare's seat. He didn't eat, he just watched us, his mind a silent, swirling vortex of dark intent. I realized then that Silas wasn't just back to claim his birthright. He was playing a game of psychological chess, and he had already taken our queen. Chapter 3: The Savage Savior. The Wangs were expected to attend the Autumn Gala, the most prestigious event for the city's elite. It was a sea of silk, champagne, and fake smiles. My parents were desperate to project an image of a reunited family, despite the fact that they were both jumping at shadows. Silas looked devastating in a tuxedo. It hid the scars we knew were there, turning him from a street urchin ghost into a dark prince. But his mind remained a battlefield, so much fat to be rendered, so many pearls to be choked on. The thoughts were constant, a background radiation of violence that made it impossible to enjoy the music. Halfway through the night, tragedy struck. My mother, laughing at a joke made by a senator's wife, suddenly stiffened. A grape had lodged in her throat. She began to turn blue, clutching her neck, her eyes wide with the sudden, cold realization of mortality. Makoto panicked. He froze, his glass of champagne shattering on the floor. Call an ambulance, someone help, he shrieked, but he didn't move. Father was no better, his hands fluttering uselessly. Silas moved, he didn't run. He glided. He grabbed mother from behind, his arms locking around her diaphragm with brutal, surgical precision. He performed the Heimlich maneuver with a force that looked like it might break her ribs. Thump. Thump. The grape flew out, skittering across the marble floor. Mother collapsed into Silas' arms, gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, oh God, Silas, thank you, she sobbed. But the voice in our heads didn't match the heroic act. I should let her die. It would be a mercy compared to what I have planned. To die by a grape. How pathetic. No, mother. You don't get to leave this world yet. You haven't paid the full price. Mother shuddered in his arms. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of profound gratitude and absolute, soul-crushing terror. She was indebted to a man who, in his heart, was already mourning her. Are you all right, mother? Silas asked, his physical voice dripping with concern as he wiped a tear from her cheek. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm fine. I stood a few feet away watching the scene. I saw the way Silas' hand lingered on her throat for a second too long. It wasn't a caress, it was a measurement. He looked at me and for a moment, the voice softened. Don't look so sad, Willow. I saved her, didn't I? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was saving them only to ensure he could be the one to destroy them. He was a cat playing with a nest of mice, and I was the only one who realized the cage was already locked. Chapter 4: The Boardroom Predator. The following week, Father made a decision that shocked the board of directors. Silas would be granted an executive position at Wang Corporation. He has a unique perspective, Father argued during the board meeting. I was sitting in the corner, acting as a secretarial assistant, a role I often took to stay close to the heart of the family business. The old guard directors who had been with the company for decades were skeptical. They saw a man with no degree and a murky past. With all due respect, Mr. Vidong, Director Chen said, leaning back in his leather chair, The boy has no experience. This is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, not a playground. Silas sat at the end of the table, his hands folded. He looked bored. Director Chen, offshore account in the Cayman Islands, account number ending in 8842. $2 million laundered from the construction project in District 4. He thinks the audit missed it. He thinks is safe. Father's eyes widened. He looked at Chen, then back at Silas. He didn't ask how Silas knew. In this family, we had stopped asking how and started asking what else. Director Chen, father said, his voice gaining a new, predatory edge. I've been looking into the District 4 project. There seem to be some discrepancies. Perhaps an offshore audit is in order, specifically the Caymans. Chen's face went from pale to ghostly. He began to sputter, his bravado evaporating. Silas' voice continued, relentless and cold. Director Lim. The mistress in Paris. The company funds used to buy her the apartment on Rue de Rivoli. Director Han. The gambling debts to the triads. Has planning to sell our trade secrets to the Min Group next Tuesday. One by one, Silas dismantled the board without saying a single word. He simply sat there, thinking their sins into existence. My father, fueled by a mixture of greed and a newfound reliance on his son's gift, used the information to purge the board of anyone who might oppose him. By the end of the day, Silas was the most powerful man in the building. As we walked to the car, I grabbed Silas' arm. How are you doing this? I whispered. How do you know these things? Silas stopped. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. People are loud, Aura. Even when they keep their mouths shut, their greed screams, their guilt hums. I just learned to listen to the frequency. You're using father, I said, my voice shaking. You're giving him what he wants, power, so he won't look at what you're really doing. Silas leaned in close. I could smell the faint scent of ozone and old paper on him. And what am I doing, little sister? You're hollow, I whispered. You're taking everything they love and turning it into ash. Silas smiled. It was the saddest thing I had ever seen. They sold the sun to buy a candle, Aura. Don't weep for the shadows. Chapter 5. The explosion of the elite. Wealthy circles are like shark tanks. The moment they scent blood, they swarm. The elites, the children of the families my father did business with, hated Silas. He was an interloper, a garbage boy who had stolen the throne from Makoto. They invited us to a yacht party under the guise of a welcome home celebration. In reality, it was an ambush. The ringleader was Julian Min, the heir to our biggest rival. He was handsome, cruel, and used to getting what he wanted. So Silas, Julian said, leaning against the railing of the yacht, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Tell us about the slums. Did you have to eat rats, or did you just beg for scraps? The group of young socialites laughed. Makoto, who had been invited by Julian, stood in the background, a smirk on his face. I felt the voice before I heard it. It was like a low-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. Julian Min, his father, hits him. He has a scar on his lower back in the shape of a belt buckle. He cries himself to sleep because he knows he'll never be half the man his father is. He wants to hurt me because he is already broken. The laughter died down as the group felt the sudden, oppressive weight of Silas' presence. Silas walked toward Julian. He didn't look angry, he looked clinical. I didn't eat rats, Julian, Silas said, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. But I did learn how to handle vermin. Suddenly, Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a string of heavy-duty firecrackers. Before anyone could react, he grabbed Julian by the jaw. With a strength that seemed impossible, he forced Julian's mouth open and shoved the unlit firecrackers inside. What the hell, someone screamed. Silas held a lighter to the fuse. The sound of a secret popping, he whispered. A beautiful symphony of blood. Let's see if his father hears this. The fuse hissed. Julian's eyes were bulging, tears of pure terror streaming down his face. He was paralyzed, his body shaking. At the last possible second, Silas pulled the firecrackers out and tossed them into the ocean. Boom! The explosion sent a plume of water into the air. Julian collapsed to the deck, sobbing and retching. The voice in our heads was calm, almost melodic. Next time, I won't be so generous. Aura, let's go. This place smells like cowardice. As we left, the elites parted like the Red Sea. They were horrified, yes, but they were also terrified. Silas had shown them that he didn't play by their rules. He didn't care about reputation or decorum. He was a force of nature. My parents, when they heard of the incident, didn't punish him. Instead, they justified it. He was protecting Aura, Mother said, her voice shaking. Those boys were being bullies. Silas is just protective. They were lying to themselves. They were choosing to believe the monster was a guardian, because the alternative that they had invited a demon into their home was too much to bear. Chapter 6. Makoto's Descent. Makoto was a man of the surface. Without his status, without his title as the heir, he was nothing. And Silas was stripping him bare, layer by layer. The final blow came when father officially removed Makoto from the succession line. It's for the best, Makoto, father said in the study, his voice cold. You've proven yourself untrustworthy. Silas is the blood heir. The company belongs to him. Makoto didn't scream, he didn't beg. He just stared at the floor, his face a mask of cold, concentrated hatred. That night, I found Makoto in the garden, speaking in hushed tones into his phone. I don't care about the cost, he whispered. Just do it. I want him gone. And if the girl gets caught in the crossfire, so be it. I gasped, stepping back into the shadows. I had to tell Silas. I had to warn him. But as I turned to run, I felt a hand over my mouth. A familiar, cold hand. Shy Willow, let the play continue. The villain is about to make his move. Silas was standing behind me. He wasn't surprised. He looked like he had been waiting for this moment for 20 years. He's going to kill you, I whispered when he let me go. He's going to try. And in trying he will give me the excuse I need to erase him. Silas, please. This has gone too far. Let's just go. We can leave this family, leave the money. Silas looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who had been sold into the dark. There is no leaving, Aura. There is only the end. The next morning, Makoto was gone. He had been kicked out of the mansion, but I knew he hadn't gone far. He was a wounded animal, and wounded animals are the most dangerous. Chapter 7 The Violation of Trust. The kidnapping happened at 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was leaving a gallery opening when a black van pulled up. 2 men in masks grabbed me. I didn't even have time to scream before the sedative took hold. When I woke up, I was in a derelict warehouse by the docks. My hands were tied behind a rusted chair. The air smelled of salt, rot, and diesel. Makoto was sitting across from me, sipping from a flask. He looked insane. His hair was greasy, his eyes darting back and forth. You're the leverage, Aura, he said, his voice cracking. Father loves his precious daughter and Silas. Silas seems to have a weakness for you too. You're pathetic, Makoto, I spat. He laughed, a shrill, jagged sound. Pathetic, I'm a survivor. Once I ruin you, once I make sure your damaged goods father will realize that Silas can't protect anything. And then, a little accident for the long-lost son. He walked toward me, his hand reaching for the buttons of my blouse. I'll tie myself to this bloodline one way or another, Aura. A pregnancy would be a very effective way to ensure I never leave the family. I felt a surge of pure, icy terror. I closed my eyes, praying for a miracle, and then, I heard it. It wasn't a hum this time. It was a roar. A psychic scream that felt like it was tearing the roof off the building. I've been waiting for you to do this, Makoto. I needed a reason to erase you. I needed you to be the monster they always suspected you were. The warehouse doors were ripped open. Not by an army, but by a single man. Silas walked in, his silhouette framed by the industrial lights. He wasn't carrying a gun. He wasn't even running, he just walked. Stay back, Makoto yelled, pulling a knife and holding it to my throat. I'll kill her, Silas, I swear to God. Silas stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Makoto with an expression of profound pity. You think you're in control, Makoto? You think you moved these pieces? I'll do it. Makoto's hand was shaking, the blade nicking my skin. A bead of blood trickled down my neck. Silas began to laugh. It wasn't his usual silent thought laugh. It was a physical, audible sound, dark and joyous. Do it then, Silas said aloud. Kill her. And then I can kill you without a single shred of guilt. But before you do, there's something you should know. Chapter 8 The Sterility Revelation. Makoto paused, his brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Silas stepped closer, his eyes locked on Makoto's. You mentioned a pregnancy, Makoto. A way to tie yourself to the vegan you bloodline. A clever plan, truly. Shut up, but there's a flaw, a biological one. Silas smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I had ever seen on a human face. Do you remember those vitamin injections the family doctor gave you 6 months ago? The ones father insisted on to keep you healthy after you were feeling fatigue. Makoto's eyes widened. What about them? I replaced them. They weren't vitamins. They were a concentrated hormonal suppressant. You're sterile, Makoto. You've been sterile for months. You couldn't impregnate a fly, let alone my sister. Makoto's face went white. The knife dropped from his hand, clattering onto the concrete. No, you're lying. You're just trying to get in my head. Search your memories. The dull ache in your groin. The way your body changed. I didn't just take your inheritance, Makoto. I took your future. I took the very possibility of your legacy. Makoto collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his head. He began to scream a primal, broken sound. He had been dismantled, not physically, but spiritually. He was a hollow shell. Silas walked over to me and untied my ropes. His touch was cold, but his eyes were strangely soft. Are you okay, Willow? He asked. I looked at him, at the man who had allowed me to be kidnapped, who had watched from the shadows, while I was threatened with the worst possible fate. Also, he could deliver a final, crushing blow to his enemy. You let this happen, I whispered, my voice trembling. You let him take me. Silas didn't deny it. I had to be sure he would go far enough. I had to be sure they would never forgive him. You're a monster, I said. Silas helped me up, perhaps, but I'm the monster this family created. Makoto was found by the police an hour later. wandering the docks and babbling incoherently about voices in the walls. He was committed to a high-security psychiatric ward the next morning. The golden child was gone. Only the ghost remained. Chapter 9: The Debt of Blood. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. My parents were shells of their former selves, terrified of the son they had welcomed back. They spent their days in their rooms, drinking and whispering. I couldn't sleep. The voice had been quiet since the warehouse, but the silence was worse. It felt like the calm before a final, devastating storm. I began to dig. I went into the attic, into the boxes of old records my father thought he had hidden. I searched for the truth behind the kidnapping, and then I found it. A black ledger hidden inside a false-bottomed trunk. It was a record of the company's finances from 20 years ago. The business had been failing. They were millions in debt, on the verge of bankruptcy. And then, a deposit, $10 million. The source was a private entity known for human trafficking. My breath hitched. I flipped the pages. There was a contract, not for a loan but for a transaction. One male child, age 6, in exchange for debt forgiveness and capital injection. My parents hadn't lost Silas. They had sold him. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the wall. They had sold their own flesh and blood to save their mansion, their cars, and their pride. They had replaced him with Makoto, a clean child, and built a life on the bones of their firstborn. You found it. I whirled around. Silas was standing in the doorway, the moonlight casting a long, jagged shadow behind him. The price of this mansion was my childhood aura. Do you understand now? Do you see the love our parents are capable of? Silas, I'm so sorry, I sobbed, the tears finally breaking through. Silas walked toward me. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Don't be sorry. You were just a baby. You were the only thing in this house that wasn't bought with blood. What are you going to do? I asked. Silas looked out the window at the sprawling estate. The debt is almost paid. Willow. Tonight the ledger closes. Chapter 10. The Last Supper. The final dinner was a formal affair. Silas had insisted on it. He had even cooked the meal himself, a traditional porridge, the kind Mother used to make when we were children. My parents sat at the table, looking like ghosts. They knew, in the way animals know when a storm is coming, they knew this was the end. Silas served them with the grace of a professional waiter. He was the perfect son. He was attentive, polite, and silent. The voice was crystal clear tonight. There was no static, no violence. Just a calm, steady rhythm. Do you remember the day you took me to the park? The day the men in the black van came. You told me to be a brave boy. You told me it was a game. Father dropped his spoon. Mother began to cry silently. I spent 5 years in a cage in Cambodia. 3 years in a labor camp in Russia. I learned how to kill before I learned how to drive. And every night, I thought of this porridge. I thought of the taste of home. Silas, please. Father choked out. It's funny. You sold me for money, and now I've used that money to buy your deaths. The arsenic is tasteless, isn't it? It blends perfectly with the salt. Mother's eyes went wide. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She fell to the floor, clutching her stomach. Father followed a moment later, his face contorting in agony. I sat there frozen. I hadn't eaten. Silas hadn't let me. Don't watch, Willow. Look at the moon, it's beautiful tonight. I couldn't look away. I watched as the parents who had raised me, the people who had sold my brother, died in the dirt of their own making. They died hearing Silas' mental laughter, a sound of pure, unadulterated release. When it was over, Silas stood over them. He looked down at their corpses with no more emotion than one would show a broken toy. He turned to me. Now, sister, let's run the company together. We'll build something that isn't made of lies. I looked at him, this man who was my brother, this monster who was a savior. The mind raiding, I whispered. How did you do it? Is it real? Silas walked over the sideboard and picked up a small, high-tech device, a localized neurotransmitter. He showed me the tiny implants behind his ears. The human mind is just an electrical circuit. Aura, he said, his physical voice low and smooth. If you know the frequency, you can broadcast anything you want. I didn't read their minds. I forced them to hear mine. I didn't tell them the truth. I told them the truth that would destroy them. I stared at the device. So, you did know about the watch, or the board members? Silas smiled. Oh, I knew. I did my research. The mind raiding was just the theater. People believe what they're afraid of. He reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind my ear. Are you afraid of me, Aura? I looked into his eyes, the dark, bottomless pits that had seen the end of the world and come back. I don't know, I said. Good. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. He offered me his hand. Let's go home, Willow. The real home. As we walked out of the manor, leaving the bodies and the ghosts behind, the rain finally stopped. The sun began to rise over the horizon, cold and indifferent, lighting up a world that belonged to us. And for the first time in my life, the voices in my head were finally silent.